To talk now more about the threat of the tariffs is Flavio Volpe. He is the president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association. Flavio, I'm so glad you're here with us this morning to talk about this, the way this schedule happened, because yesterday at that press conference, which I'm sure you were watching, the Prime Minister and Doug Ford both saying the Ontario automotive industry is in Trump's targets, and the Prime Minister highlighted the 50 years of the Auto Pact, how good it's been for both countries. What is your response to what you've seen so far from Canada in terms of its approach to these threats of tariffs?
Look, putting politics aside, these two have helped to lead, together with the industry, the biggest investment in the sector in 40 years. You know, in the last 2 years, how many announcements have we talked about? All of those were wins we did against our U.S. competition. And so I think Trump has taken notice. Other American interests have taken notice, and you know, I can't defend those interests. I don't get to those tables. The Prime Minister will be at that table, and you know, the Premier sounding like Captain Canada, and certainly the Prime Minister has receded from that space a little bit and said, look, the First Ministers and the Chair, the Premiers, you know, you're going to get a lot more exposure here. What do you have to say? And when Doug Ford said country first yesterday, you know, it made me feel really good about this uncharted water that we're going into.
It really does feel uncharted. So what is the concern at the automotive parts manufacturers about, I mean, it is unknown, but we know Donald Trump has your industry in particular in mind. What's your, like, 1 to 10 concern level, 10 being the worst?
It's probably an 8.
Okay.
But we've been there before. You know, in the Trump 1.0, he took aim at the NAFTA, but really at the core of it was the automotive rules.
Yeah.
And they talk about American cars and Canadian cars. Well, there are no Canadian car companies. There are American car companies and Japanese car companies making cars here for American consumers. Yeah. But of the 2 million cars that are made here, about 1 million are General Motors, Ford, Dodge, Chrysler. And about half of the parts that go into all of the cars, including the Toyotas and the Hondas, come from U.S. factories. And about 55% of the raw materials, the steel from Pennsylvania or resins from Texas. So when he says, look, I'm going to take aim at Canada, we don't need their cars, well, he's really taking aim at some of the biggest American players in the space that we've all kind of worked together for 120 years. You know, Ford got to Windsor in 1904. Yeah. So I think it's really important that the Canadian negotiating team has the clarity to be able to show, like we did in the first one, if you take a shot at Oshawa, you're taking a shot at Detroit. And if you're going to take a shot at Detroit today, Beijing is the only one that wins. So here we are.
Flavio, has anybody crunched the numbers in terms of what these tariffs might mean if this 25% went in? Because we understand that cars and parts, you know, crisscross the border, you know, 7 or 8 times before they're finished. What might that mean to the price of a vehicle?
A few things. Look, everybody in the business, whether you're in materials, parts, or cars, your profit margin is single digits. You know, they're all publicly traded. Everybody can look it up. So if you turn around and put a tariff of 5 or 10%, these companies will be under serious stress. At 25%, no one is going to make a car that they book a 15% loss on. So what would likely happen at 25% is, like we saw during the Ambassador Bridge blockade in 2022, the industry would stop making cars immediately and then turn around and say, okay, where do we find relief? We went to court to get an emergency injunction to clear that bridge to get things moving. I would, if I was a major American car company and all of my supplies from Canada cost 25% and it blew all my margins and we couldn't get them and prices would go up across the board. So in the U.S., you know, a truck made in Oshawa is going to be $75,000 instead of $60,000. You know, he's not the king. He's got to use a legal instrument. He's going to put it on the table next week. You go to court and try to get an injunction on that. So
what are you hearing from your counterparts on the other side of the border? Because Trump has come in with a much bigger mandate, seemingly much more in control than he was in 1.0. What's the vibe you're getting from that side of the border?
Look, on the other side of the border, the Americans, our partners, know how integrated we are. We're their biggest customer of steel, biggest customer of resins. There's 156 Canadian-owned auto parts plants in 19 U.S. states. Canadian companies employ about 50,000 Americans. We did an analysis yesterday with the group that said we think there's 125,000 jobs in the U.S. that rely on the automotive trade with Canada. And so, you know, what we learned in our lesson from the first time with Trump is keep those networks alive. Keep the congressional representatives, the senators, and the governors understanding that, hey, a company like a Martin Rea is one of the biggest employers in Kentucky. So if you're going to take aim in Vaughan, you're going to get hit in Kentucky, and it isn't. It's no laughing matter. These jobs come with these big capital-intensive factories. Once they leave, they leave.
Yeah, it's a great point. Okay, we'll see what happens on come Monday when Donald Trump becomes the president once again. Flavio Volpe, appreciate the time this morning. Thanks for the perspective here. Thank you so much.